At 11:43 p.m., Highway 47 was nearly empty. It was one of those quiet stretches of road outside the city where the streetlights grew farther apart and the darkness between them seemed deeper than usual. A single patrol car sat parked in the gravel shoulder near a bend in the road. Inside the vehicle, Officer Travis Caldwell watched the highway through the windshield. 22 years on the force had given him a certain confidence. The kind that came from knowing the area, knowing the people, and knowing exactly how most traffic stops would go before he even stepped out of the car. He took a sip of lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. The radio crackled quietly in the background. Nothing unusual tonight, just another quiet shift. Then headlights appeared in the distance. A dark sedan approached steadily, moving at a calm and controlled speed. Caldwell leaned forward slightly. His eyes moved automatically to the radar screen mounted on the dashboard. 54 miles per hour. The speed limit was 50. Technically enough for a stop. Not unusual, but something about the car caught his attention. The vehicle slowed slightly as it passed under the streetlight. Black sedan. Clean. Newer model. Out-of-state plates. Caldwell raised an eyebrow. Cars like that rarely passed through this area at this hour. He reached for the switch. Blue and red lights flashed to life behind him. The sedan slowed almost immediately and pulled onto the shoulder. "Dispatch," Caldwell said into the radio. "Go ahead. Running a traffic stop. Highway 47 near mile marker 16. Copy." Caldwell opened the door and stepped out. The cold air carried the distant sound of wind moving through the trees along the roadside. The sedan idled quietly, its brake lights glowing red against the darkness. Caldwell approached slowly, his hand resting near his belt out of habit. When he reached the driver's side window, he tapped the glass. The window rolled down. The driver looked up. A man in his early 40s. Calm expression. Well-dressed for someone traveling at night. Dark jacket. Collared shirt. Clean cut. No nervous movements. "Evening," Caldwell said. The man nodded politely. "Good evening, officer. License and registration." The man reached for his wallet. His movements were slow and deliberate. No sudden gestures. He handed over the documents. Caldwell glanced at them. Name, Daniel Mercer. Out-of-state license. Caldwell studied him for a moment. "Do you know why I stopped you?" Mercer shook his head. "No, sir. You were going 54 in a 50. Mercer blinked once, then gave a small nod. "I see." Not argumentative. Not defensive. Just calm. Almost too calm. Caldwell watched him carefully. "You heading somewhere tonight?" "Just passing through." "From where?" "Richmond." "Where you headed?" "Chicago." Caldwell studied the man's face. Nothing unusual, but something about the interaction bothered him. Maybe it was the calmness. Most drivers got a little nervous during traffic stops. This man didn't. Not even slightly. Caldwell stepped back. "Sit tight." He walked back toward the patrol car. Inside, he ran the license through the system. The screen flickered. Then the information appeared. Clean record. No warrants. No alerts. Caldwell frowned slightly. He looked back toward the sedan. The driver sat patiently with both hands resting on the steering wheel. Exactly where officers liked them. Too perfect. Caldwell leaned back in the seat. Something about this didn't feel right. He checked the plate again. Still nothing. But the instinct didn't fade. He grabbed the radio. "Dispatch. Go ahead. Any record on Daniel Mercer?" "Stand by." Several seconds passed. Then the dispatcher answered. "Driver's record appears clean." Caldwell stared at the screen. Clean records weren't unusual, but the instinct in his gut kept whispering the same thought. Something is off. He stepped out of the car again. As he approached the sedan, Mercer lowered the window slightly more. Caldwell rested his hand on the door. "You traveling alone?" "Yes." "Mind stepping out of the vehicle?" Mercer paused briefly. "Is there a problem?" "Just step out." Mercer nodded. He opened the door and stepped onto the shoulder. Tall, athletic build, posture straight. Caldwell noticed it immediately. Military posture. He had seen it before. But Mercer didn't say anything. He simply stood calmly beside the car. Caldwell walked around the vehicle slowly, looking, observing. "You carrying anything illegal tonight?" "No." "You mind if I take a look in the car?" Mercer's answer came without hesitation. "I'd prefer if you didn't." Caldwell stopped walking. Most people would say yes, out of nervousness, out of pressure. But Mercer didn't. Caldwell turned back toward him. "You refusing a lawful request?" "I'm exercising my rights." The words were polite, but firm, and that changed everything. Caldwell's expression hardened. "Turn around." Mercer blinked. "I'm sorry." "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." For the first time, Mercer looked slightly confused. "Officer, I haven't done anything wrong." "Turn around." The tone was no longer a request. Mercer hesitated, just briefly. Then he complied. Hands behind his back. Caldwell pulled out the handcuffs. Click. Metal tightened around Mercer's wrists. "Daniel Mercer," Caldwell said firmly, "you're being detained for obstruction of an investigation." Mercer looked over his shoulder. His voice remained calm. "Officer, this is a mistake." Caldwell ignored him. He walked Mercer toward the patrol car. The highway remained silent. Wind moved through the trees again. Caldwell placed Mercer in the back seat, then returned to the sedan. Inside the car, he began searching. Glove compartment, center console, back seat. Nothing unusual. No drugs. No weapons. Just luggage. A laptop bag sat on the passenger seat. Caldwell opened it. Inside was a slim black folder. He flipped it open, and immediately froze. Inside the folder was a small leather case. Caldwell opened it. His breath caught. A federal badge stared back at him. 3 letters. FBI. Caldwell stared at it, then flipped the identification card beside it. Name, Special Agent Daniel Mercer. The air suddenly felt colder. Caldwell turned slowly toward the patrol car. Inside the back seat, the man he had just handcuffed sat quietly, watching. And for the first time that night, Daniel Mercer spoke again. His voice calm, almost sympathetic. "You might want to call your supervisor." Caldwell felt the ground beneath his confidence begin to shift. But what he didn't realize yet was that the traffic stop wasn't just a mistake. It had just interrupted a federal investigation already in progress. And within the next 30 minutes, the quiet highway would fill with flashing lights. Not from local police, but from federal agents who had been watching everything. The cold night air along Highway 47 suddenly felt much heavier. Officer Travis Caldwell stood beside the open passenger door of the black sedan, staring down at the leather case in his hands. Inside it sat the unmistakable shape of a federal badge. Next to it was the identification card. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Special Agent Daniel Mercer. For several seconds, Caldwell didn't move. The sound of the sedan's engine idling hummed softly in the background. A distant truck passed on the highway, its headlights briefly illuminating the patrol car and the man sitting in the back seat. Daniel Mercer sat exactly where Caldwell had left him. Hands cuffed, posture straight, calm, watching. Caldwell snapped the case shut and turned slowly toward the patrol car. His mind raced through possibilities. Fake badge, impersonation, some kind of elaborate bluff. It happens sometimes. People carried fake credentials to intimidate officers during stops. But something about Mercer didn't match that pattern. Most imposters talk too much. They tried to convince you. Mercer hadn't tried to convince him at all. He had simply said, "You might want to call your supervisor." Caldwell walked toward the patrol car. Mercer looked up through the metal divider. Their eyes met in the rearview mirror. Neither man spoke. Caldwell opened the door and slid into the driver's seat. He turned slightly. "Why didn't you say something earlier?" Mercer's voice was steady. "You didn't ask." Caldwell stared at him. "That badge real?" Mercer tilted his head slightly. "You already know the answer to that." Caldwell's jaw tightened. "You could have avoided all this." Mercer shook his head slowly. "Actually, I couldn't." The words landed strangely. Caldwell frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Mercer leaned back slightly against the seat. You stopped me. Yes. You detained me. Yes. You searched my car without consent. Caldwell felt irritation rising. You refused the search. Mercer nodded once. That's correct. The silence returned. Then Mercer said something else. Quiet, careful. And you interrupted an active investigation. Caldwell felt a chill move down his spine. What investigation? Mercer didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the windshield. His eyes scanned the dark highway, almost like he was waiting for something. Then he spoke again. They should be here soon. Caldwell turned sharply. Who? Mercer met his eyes again. My backup. Caldwell laughed once. Short and skeptical. You didn't call anyone. No. Your phone's still in the car. Yes. So how exactly is backup coming? Mercer's answer was simple. They were already nearby. The words hung in the air. Caldwell suddenly felt the uncomfortable sensation that he had stepped into something much bigger than a routine stop. He reached for the radio. Dispatch. Go ahead. Can you verify federal credentials for an individual? Stand by. Several seconds passed. Caldwell glanced in the mirror again. Mercer remained perfectly calm. Too calm. The dispatcher returned. Go ahead with the name. Caldwell hesitated briefly. Daniel Mercer. More silence. Then the dispatcher returned again. But her voice had changed slightly. Officer Caldwell. Where did you say you were located? Highway 47. Mile marker 16. Another pause. Then, stand by. Caldwell frowned. He waited. 30 seconds passed. Then the dispatcher spoke again. But this time her tone carried something he had never heard from her before. Carefulness. Officer Caldwell. Remain where you are. I am. You should be receiving assistance shortly. What kind of assistance? The dispatcher hesitated. Then simply said, Units are on the way. Caldwell frowned again. Local units? But the radio had already gone quiet. Caldwell turned slightly in his seat. What did you do? Mercer didn't answer. Instead, he glanced past Caldwell's shoulder, toward the highway behind them. Caldwell followed his gaze. At first he saw nothing, just darkness. Then, headlights. 2 vehicles appeared around the bend. They moved quickly, too quickly for normal traffic. Caldwell stepped out of the patrol car. The vehicles approached rapidly. One black SUV, then another, both slowing as they neared the shoulder. They stopped behind the patrol car. Their doors opened almost simultaneously. 4 figures stepped out. Dark jackets, serious expressions. The letters were visible immediately. FBI. Caldwell's stomach tightened. One of the agents walked forward. Tall, calm, authority in every step. He stopped a few feet away. Officer Caldwell? Caldwell nodded. Yes. The man reached into his jacket and produced a badge. Special Agent Victor Hayes. Behind him, 2 other agents were already approaching the patrol car. Hayes gestured slightly toward the vehicle. You have Agent Mercer in custody? Caldwell felt suddenly aware of how ridiculous the situation sounded. Yes. Hayes nodded slowly. Let's start by uncuffing him. Caldwell hesitated, then walked toward the patrol car. He opened the door. Mercer stepped out calmly as Caldwell removed the cuffs. Agent Hayes watched carefully. Thank you. Mercer rubbed his wrists slightly, then looked toward Hayes. You took your time. Hayes gave a faint smile. We were watching. Caldwell blinked. Watching? Hayes turned toward him. Yes. For how long? Caldwell asked. Hayes glanced at Mercer. About 20 minutes. Caldwell felt the blood drain from his face. You saw the stop? Hayes nodded. We saw everything. The words hit like a hammer. Mercer stepped forward. Officer Caldwell. His tone wasn't angry. It wasn't threatening either. It sounded more like someone explaining an unfortunate misunderstanding. I wasn't just driving through town tonight. Hayes continued the sentence. He's part of an ongoing federal operation. Caldwell stared at them. What kind of operation? Hayes studied him carefully. One that required surveillance. Mercer added quietly. And anonymity. Caldwell looked back at the sedan. Then at the agents. Then back at Mercer. You're telling me you were under surveillance? Mercer nodded. For the last 48 hours. Hayes crossed his arms. And your traffic stop interrupted that. Caldwell's mind raced. What were you investigating? Hayes looked toward the dark highway, then back at Caldwell. The reason Agent Mercer was driving that car tonight. He paused, then added something that made Caldwell's stomach drop completely. The same reason another vehicle was supposed to meet him here. Caldwell blinked. Another vehicle? Mercer nodded slowly. Yes. The highway behind them remained quiet. Wind moved through the trees again. Hayes spoke calmly. And, unfortunately, he looked down the road. That vehicle is now late. Caldwell followed his gaze. Then a new set of headlights appeared in the distance. Approaching the highway bend. Moving slowly. Hayes turned toward Mercer. Looks like your meeting finally arrived. Mercer's expression hardened slightly. Caldwell suddenly realized something. The traffic stop hadn't just been a mistake. It had exposed a federal operation. And the people in the approaching vehicle had no idea that 4 FBI agents and a local cop were now waiting for them on the side of the road. The headlights grew brighter as the vehicle approached the bend in Highway 47. The road was still empty except for the cluster of vehicles gathered on the shoulder, the patrol car, the 2 black SUVs, and the small group of people standing beside them. Agent Victor Hayes watched the approaching lights carefully. No one spoke. The wind carried the distant hum of the engine as the vehicle drew closer. Beside him, Daniel Mercer stood with his hands in his coat pockets, his eyes fixed on the road. Officer Travis Caldwell stood slightly behind them, still trying to process the situation he had accidentally stepped into. A few minutes ago, he thought he was dealing with a suspicious driver. Now he was standing beside federal agents waiting for unknown suspects to arrive at a meeting he had unknowingly interrupted. Hayes spoke quietly. That's them. Caldwell swallowed. How can you tell? Hayes didn't look at him. Same car we've been tracking for 2 days. The vehicle rounded the bend. A dark gray SUV. Older model. It slowed as it approached the flashing patrol lights. Inside the vehicle, the driver could clearly see the scene now. Police lights. Federal SUVs. Multiple people standing on the shoulder. The SUV slowed even further. Inside, the driver leaned forward. 2 men sat in the front. Another figure in the back. They exchanged quick glances. The driver spoke quietly. That wasn't part of the plan. The passenger beside him frowned. Maybe it's unrelated. But the third man in the back seat had already noticed something else. Those aren't just cops. The vehicle rolled forward another 20 yards. Now the silhouettes of the agents were visible under the streetlight. The 3 men inside the SUV grew very quiet. Agent Hayes took a small step forward. His voice calm. Showtime. The SUV stopped about 20 feet away. Its engine remained running. No one inside moved. Hayes raised a hand slightly, signaling the other agents. They spread out subtly, not aggressively, but positioned, ready. Caldwell watched carefully. He had seen drug stops before, but this felt different. There was a level of quiet control in the way the agents moved that he wasn't used to seeing. Mercer stepped closer to Hayes. They weren't expecting this. Hayes nodded. That's the idea. Inside the SUV, the driver spoke again. This doesn't look good. The passenger leaned forward. You think Mercer tipped them off? The third man shook his head. No. If he had, they wouldn't be standing like that. What do you mean? They're waiting. Outside, Hayes raised his voice slightly. Evening, gentlemen. The driver rolled the window down halfway. Problem, officer? Hayes held up his badge. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Inside the SUV, all 3 men went still. Hayes continued. Step out of the vehicle. The driver forced a casual smile. We didn't do anything. Hayes didn't respond. He simply repeated. Step out of the vehicle. The driver glanced at his passenger again. Something passed silently between them, a quick decision. Then the driver slowly opened the door. The passenger followed. The man in the back seat stepped out last. Hayes gestured calmly. "Hands where we can see them." The three men complied. Agent Mercer stepped forward slightly. The moment they saw him, their expressions changed. Shock, recognition. The driver's voice came out almost as a whisper. "Mercer." Mercer nodded. "Evening." The passenger's face twisted with anger. "You set us up." Mercer tilted his head slightly. "No." He gestured toward Caldwell. "He did." All eyes turned briefly toward the officer standing near the patrol car. Caldwell felt extremely uncomfortable under the sudden attention. Hayes spoke again. "Gentlemen, you've been under federal investigation for several months." The driver said nothing. Hayes continued. "Tonight you were planning to deliver stolen federal equipment." The passenger's jaw tightened. "You can't prove that." Agent Morales stepped forward, holding a tablet. "We already did." She turned the screen slightly. Satellite images. License plate tracking. Phone intercept records. The driver's shoulders sagged slightly. He realized the situation was already finished. But the man who had been sitting in the back seat looked different. His eyes moved quickly, calculating, looking at the agents, looking at the road, looking at the patrol car. Hayes noticed immediately. "Don't." But the man moved suddenly. He bolted toward the SUV. Caldwell reacted instinctively. "Stop." The man reached the door. Mercer was faster. He moved forward with the speed of someone trained for moments exactly like this. In 2 steps, he closed the distance. One controlled movement. The man was on the ground before he even realized what had happened. Mercer held him there calmly until Hayes stepped forward with cuffs. The suspect struggled briefly, then stopped. Hayes secured the cuffs. "Appreciate the assist." Mercer stood and brushed dust from his coat. "No problem." The other 2 suspects didn't move. Their confidence had completely vanished. Within minutes, the agents had secured all 3 men. The SUV was searched. Inside the rear compartment were several locked cases. Hayes opened one. Inside sat military-grade communication equipment. Restricted technology. Exactly what Mercer had been tracking. Agent Morales nodded. "That's it." Hayes closed the case. He turned toward Caldwell. For a moment, the highway was quiet again. The suspects were placed in the back of the federal SUVs. The agents moved with practiced efficiency. Then Hayes approached the officer. Caldwell felt his stomach tighten again. "I didn't know," Caldwell said quickly. Hayes nodded calmly. "I know." Caldwell looked toward Mercer. "You were meeting them here." Mercer nodded. "Yes. And I ruined it." Mercer shook his head slightly. "No." Caldwell frowned. "What do you mean?" Mercer looked toward the SUV where the suspects now sat in custody. "They thought they were meeting a buyer." Hayes finished the thought. "But because you stopped Mercer," he gestured toward the suspects. "They walked straight into a federal arrest." Caldwell blinked. "So, I actually helped." Hayes gave a small smile. "Not intentionally," Mercer added calmly. "But sometimes mistakes work out." The flashing lights illuminated the quiet highway once more. The operation that had taken months to prepare had ended on the side of a dark road. Not exactly as planned, but successfully. Still, Hayes looked toward Mercer again. "There's just one more thing." Mercer raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Hayes glanced toward Caldwell. "The reason they were willing to meet you tonight." Mercer's expression changed slightly, more serious now, because they both knew what Hayes was about to say. The suspects in the SUV weren't the top of the chain. They were only the middlemen, and the real target of the investigation still had no idea what had just happened on Highway 47. The flashing lights from the federal SUVs painted the dark trees along Highway 47 in alternating red and blue. The suspects sat quietly in the back seats of the vehicles now. Their earlier confidence had completely disappeared. The cases containing the stolen federal equipment had been secured. Agent Dana Morales had already begun documenting the evidence while another agent radioed the field office. From the outside, it looked like the operation was over. But the tension among the agents suggested otherwise. Officer Travis Caldwell leaned against his patrol car, still trying to process the last 30 minutes. He had started the night pulling over a car for a minor traffic violation. Now he was standing in the middle of a federal operation involving stolen government technology and multiple arrests. He looked toward Daniel Mercer, who stood beside Agent Victor Hayes near the gray SUV. The two men spoke quietly. Caldwell couldn't hear what they were saying, but their expressions told him enough. Something about the situation still wasn't finished. Hayes closed the trunk of the suspect vehicle and turned toward Mercer. "You did good tonight." Mercer nodded. "Didn't go exactly how we planned." Hayes gave a small smile. "It rarely does." Mercer glanced toward the federal SUVs. The suspects were still inside. Two of them looked defeated. But the third man, the one Mercer had tackled earlier, was watching everything carefully through the tinted glass. Mercer had noticed that look before. It wasn't fear. It was calculation. Mercer spoke quietly. "He hasn't said anything." Hayes nodded. "Not yet." Mercer crossed his arms. "He will." Hayes looked toward the road. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether he believes his boss can still protect him." Mercer's expression hardened slightly. "His boss won't be protecting anyone tonight." Hayes exhaled slowly. "We'll see." Across the shoulder, Caldwell finally approached them. "I've got a question." Hayes turned toward him. "Go ahead." Caldwell gestured toward the SUV where the suspects sat. "You said earlier those guys were middlemen." "That's right." "So who's the real target?" For a moment, Hayes didn't answer. Instead, he looked toward Mercer. Mercer gave a small nod. Hayes turned back to Caldwell. "You ever heard of Adrian Wolf?" Caldwell frowned. "No." Hayes wasn't surprised. "Most people haven't." Mercer spoke next. "He runs a private security contracting firm." Caldwell shrugged. "That doesn't sound illegal." Hayes continued. "On paper, it isn't." Mercer added quietly. "But several pieces of federal equipment have disappeared over the past year." Hayes nodded. "Military-grade communications systems." Caldwell's eyes widened slightly. "The stuff in those cases?" "Yes." "And this Wolf guy is behind it?" Hayes gave a small nod. "We believe so." Caldwell looked toward the SUV again. "So those guys were delivering the equipment to him?" Mercer shook his head. "No." Caldwell blinked. "Then what were they doing?" Hayes answered. "They were selling it to us." Caldwell looked confused. "You mean to the FBI?" Mercer gave a slight smile. "Undercover." The realization slowly spread across Caldwell's face. "So tonight was supposed to be a sting." "Yes," Hayes said. "And Mercer was posing as the buyer." Caldwell looked back at Mercer. "And I arrested you." Mercer shrugged lightly. "You didn't know." Caldwell rubbed the back of his neck. "So if those guys were selling the equipment to you, where does this Wolf guy come in?" Hayes looked toward the gray SUV. "That's the interesting part." He motioned toward Agent Morales, who opened the rear door of the federal vehicle. The third suspect stepped out, the same man Mercer had tackled earlier. Hayes approached him calmly. "You want to tell them?" The man laughed bitterly. "You already know." Hayes nodded. "Yes, but sometimes hearing it out loud helps." The man looked toward Mercer. "You think this is over?" Mercer didn't respond. The suspect smiled faintly. "You really don't know, do you?" Hayes watched him carefully. "Know what?" The man tilted his head. "You spent months chasing the wrong guy." Mercer's expression changed slightly. "Explain." The suspect leaned back against the SUV. "You think Adrian Wolf runs the operation?" "That's what the evidence shows," Hayes said. The man shook his head slowly. "No." He glanced toward Caldwell. "You want to know the funny part, officer?" Caldwell didn't answer. The suspect smiled again. The real boss was standing here the whole time. The highway went silent. Hayes frowned. What are you talking about? The suspect nodded toward Mercer. Ask him. All eyes turned toward Daniel Mercer. Mercer didn't move. He didn't react. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind moving through the trees. Then Mercer spoke. His voice calm, controlled. He's bluffing. The suspect laughed again. Am I? Hayes watched Mercer closely now. Something about the tension between the two men had shifted. Daniel, Hayes said quietly. Mercer met his eyes. Yes. Hayes spoke carefully. Tell me he's lying. Mercer didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked down the dark highway, then back at Hayes. You remember when this investigation started? Yes. 7 months ago. That's right. Mercer nodded. And who brought the first evidence to your office? Hayes froze. The memory clicked instantly. You did. Mercer gave a small nod. That's right. The suspect in the SUV smiled wider. Hayes felt the ground shift beneath the investigation. Daniel, what are you saying? Mercer sighed quietly. I'm saying the operation needed a leak. Hayes stared at him. A leak. Mercer nodded slowly. Someone inside the system who could control the flow of equipment. Caldwell felt his heart begin to race. Wait! Mercer turned toward him. Officer Caldwell? When you stopped me tonight. Yes. Mercer gave a faint, tired smile. You didn't ruin the operation. Hayes' voice dropped. You started it. The realization hit him like a shockwave. You used us. Mercer nodded. Not just you. Hayes stepped closer. All of us. Mercer's eyes were steady now. Yes. The suspect began laughing loudly. You see it now. Hayes' voice hardened. Daniel Mercer. Are you confessing to running this operation? Mercer shook his head. No. Hayes frowned. Then what are you confessing to? Mercer's answer was quiet. I was hunting someone much bigger. Caldwell blinked. Bigger than Wolf? Mercer nodded. Yes. Hayes stared at him. And? Mercer looked toward the federal SUVs where the suspects sat in custody. Tonight proved something. What? Mercer spoke calmly. Someone inside the FBI tipped them off about our operation. The silence returned again. Hayes' expression slowly shifted. You're saying there's a mole? Mercer nodded. Yes. Hayes looked toward the suspects, then back at Mercer. And you used this whole investigation to find him. Mercer's answer was simple. Yes. Caldwell stared at him. So the real mastermind, Mercer finished the sentence quietly, is still out there. The flashing lights continued to illuminate the dark highway. The arrests had been made. The evidence had been recovered. But the real enemy had just been revealed. And somewhere inside the system, someone powerful had just realized their secret was dangerously close to being exposed.